Velthar walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Assembly Hall. His blue skin reflected the lights above. His forearms carried data tablets and documents.
He had attended this meeting 200 times before.
200 times in his long life as the Kryn Empire's best diplomat. The hall stretched wide before him. Rows of seats curved around a central podium where speakers would stand. Representatives from 47 different alien species filled the space. Some had fur, some had scales, some floated in special tanks filled with liquid. All of them were important. All of them were powerful. Velthar knew the rules of this place. The front rows meant power. The species who sat closest to the podium were the ones everyone respected. The ones everyone feared. The Kryn always sat in the third row, close enough to show their strength but not so close that they seemed desperate for attention. He moved toward his usual seat. His eyes scanned the crowd out of habit. The Aquilon delegate sat in the first row, her gills pulsing with pride. The Marthan scholars occupied the second row, their multiple eyes watching everything. The Zephyrit merchants had claimed spots in the fourth row, counting their profits on holographic displays. Then Velthar saw them. The humans, they sat in the very last row, all the way in the back. Ambassador Teo sat quietly with a simple tablet in his hands. Next to him, military advisor Heisun adjusted her dark uniform. Cultural liaison Bomi studied something on her screen. They looked calm, almost invisible among the chaos of the more prominent delegations. Velthar had noticed this pattern before. Every single meeting for the past 30 years, the humans chose the back row. When he first saw it, he thought maybe they arrived late. But no, they always came early. They just walked past all the empty front seats and went straight to the back. At first, he thought it was humility. Humans were the youngest species in the council, only 30 years as members. Maybe they felt they had not earned better seats yet. That made sense to Velthar. Young species should know their place. The session began. The speaker, a tall being made of crystallized light, called for order. Discussion started about trade routes, then mining rights, then border disputes. Species stood one by one to present their arguments. They shouted. They threatened. They made promises and deals. The humans never stood up. Teo took notes. Heisun watched quietly. Bomi sometimes whispered to her companions, but they never raised their voices to be heard. Other species noticed. The Aquilon delegate laughed during a break. "Look at the humans," she said loudly. So quiet in the back, like children afraid to speak. A Marthan scholar clicked his mandibles in amusement. They have impressive warships, but lack the courage to use their voice here. Strange creatures. Velthar said nothing, but he wondered. He had read Earth's military reports. Humans had stopped 3 pirate invasions in their sector. They had defended colonies for weaker species. Their soldiers were known for being tough and smart in battle. So why did they act so passive here? The main debate of the day began. The Viridian sector had resources many species wanted. Arguments grew heated. The Aquilon wanted exclusive mining rights. The Zephyrites wanted free trade access. The Skrell sovereignty demanded territorial control. Velthar stood and used his deep voice to propose a compromise. Other species listened because the Kryn were strong. When he finished, several delegates nodded in agreement. He felt satisfied. This was how power worked in the galaxy. You showed your strength and others respected you. He glanced back at the humans. Teo was still writing notes. What was he writing? Why didn't he stand and fight for Earth's interests? After the session ended, Velthar couldn't stop thinking about it. He returned to his quarters and accessed the Assembly's historical records. He spent hours reviewing past sessions. Every single one showed the same thing. Humans in the back row, silent, watching. Even during debates that directly affected Earth, they barely spoke. When they did speak, it was brief and quiet. They never demanded, never threatened, never showed the kind of strength that made others fear them. Velthar grew more confused. He knew about Earth's history. He had studied it as part of his diplomatic training. Humans came from a violent world. They had fought terrible wars among themselves. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, wars that killed millions. They were survivors, fighters. But here, in this place of power, they acted like they had no strength at all. The next day, Velthar made a decision. He would talk to them. He would solve this mystery. He found Teo in the station's observation lounge. The human stood by a large window looking out at the stars. Velthar approached carefully. His heavy footsteps made the floor vibrate slightly. Ambassador Teo, Velthar said in Galactic Standard language. The human turned. He was shorter than Velthar, as most species were shorter than the Kryn. His dark eyes showed no fear. Ambassador Velthar, it's an honor to finally speak with you. I have a question, Velthar said. He saw no reason to waste time with small talk. Why do humans always sit in the back row? Teo smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that made Velthar think the human was keeping secrets. It's just where we're comfortable. Comfortable? Velthar's upper arms crossed over his chest. But the front rows are where powerful species sit. Where voices are heard, where respect is earned. Is that so? Teo's smile didn't change. We don't see it that way. Then how do you see it? The human looked back at the stars. We see things differently than most species, Ambassador. Our perspective is unique. This answer frustrated Velthar. It explained nothing. Ambassador Teo, I mean no disrespect, but your species has strength. I have read your military records. Why do you hide that strength in the assembly? We're not hiding anything, Teo said softly. We're exactly where we need to be. Velthar wanted to push harder to demand a real answer, but diplomatic training stopped him. Pushing too hard would insult the human. Instead, he tried a different approach. Perhaps we could share a meal? I would like to understand human culture better. Teo's smile grew a little wider. We would be happy to join you, Ambassador. Let me invite my colleagues. You'll get to meet more of our delegation. They agreed on a time and place. As Velthar walked away, he felt certain he would get his answers soon. Humans couldn't be that different from other species. They had to want power and respect like everyone else. But deep in his mind, a small doubt existed. What if humans truly were different? What if their back row had meaning he couldn't understand? He pushed the thought away. After 200 sessions and countless successful negotiations, Velthar knew how the galaxy worked. Power sat in front. Weakness sat in back. It was that simple, wasn't it? The restaurant occupied a quiet section of Apex Prime Station. Velthar arrived first and chose a large table near the center of the room. He wanted the humans to feel important, so he picked a visible location where other diplomats might see them dining together. Teo arrived with 3 other humans. Velthar recognized Haesun and Bomi from the assembly. The third human was new. This is Wu Sung, our chief of security, Teo introduced. And this is Jihai, our scientific advisor, and Dongwook, our trade representative. Velthar noticed something immediately. The humans didn't sit down right away. Their eyes moved across the room. They checked the exits. They looked at the other diners. When they finally sat, each human chose their position carefully. Their backs faced walls. They could all see the entrance. An excellent choice of restaurant, Teo said as he settled into his chair. His back pressed against the wall behind him. They ordered food. Velthar tried dishes from Earth while the humans sampled Kryn cuisine. The conversation started with pleasant topics: trade, technology, cultural exchanges, but Velthar's mind kept returning to his questions. I have studied Earth's history, Velthar said carefully. Your species has survived many conflicts, wars that would have destroyed other civilizations. We have a complicated past, Bomi agreed. She sat with her hands visible on the table. But her eyes kept moving to the restaurant's entrance every few minutes. Yet here, in the assembly, you are so quiet, so restrained. Velthar chose his words with care. Other species see this as weakness. Wusung laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Let them think what they want. But don't you want respect? Power? Velthar asked. His 4 hands gestured widely. In the galaxy, silence means nothing. Strength must be shown. The humans exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, Jihai spoke. Ambassador Velthar, can I ask you something? When you enter a room, where do you prefer to sit? The question surprised him. I sit where I can be seen, where my voice carries, where others know I am present. And do you feel safe in those positions? Jihai asked. Safe? Velthar's head tilted in confusion. I am Kryn, we are warriors. We do not worry about safety in a diplomatic setting. Exactly, Jihai said quietly. You don't have to worry. But we do, always. Velthar didn't understand. The assembly has excellent security. The station is protected by multiple fleets. What do you fear? Bomi leaned forward slightly. It's not fear, Ambassador. It's awareness. On Earth, we have a saying, never sit with your back to the door. Why not? Velthar asked. Because you can't see what's coming, Wusung said simply. The conversation moved to other topics, but Velthar's mind stayed on those words. He watched the humans throughout the meal. They were relaxed but never truly at ease. Always watching, always aware. Even when they laughed or told stories, part of their attention stayed on their surroundings. It reminded him of soldiers in combat zones, not diplomats at a dinner. After the meal ended, Velthar returned to his quarters and began deeper research. He accessed Earth's historical databases. What he found disturbed him. Humans had not just fought wars, they had fought constantly. For thousands of years. Wars over land, wars over resources, wars over ideas. They had developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet. They had come close to extinction multiple times, but other species had violent histories too. The Kryn had conquered half their star system before achieving peace. The Aquilon had clan wars that lasted centuries. Violence was not unique to humanity. So what made humans different? Velthar dug deeper. He read about human evolution. They were persistence predators. They chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, but they were also prey themselves in their early history. Predators hunted them. They survived by being smart and aware. He read about human psychology. They had something called pattern recognition. They saw threats others missed. They planned for dangers that seemed unlikely. They prepared for disasters before disasters happened. One document caught his attention. It was a human military manual about something called tactical positioning. Velthar read it 3 times. The manual explained that the best position in any space was not the most visible one. It was the position with the best view of threats. The position with the most escape routes. The position where you could defend yourself and others most effectively. According to this manual, sitting in the front of a room was dangerous. You couldn't see behind you. You had limited escape options. You became an easy target. Sitting in the back was superior. You saw everything. You controlled access. You could respond to any threat from any direction. Velthar sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Could this be why humans chose the back row? Not from weakness, but from tactical thinking? He decided to test this theory. The next day, he spoke with other diplomats about humanity. Their responses fascinated him. The Aquilon delegate laughed. Humans, they lack confidence. They know they are young and weak compared to established powers. The Marthan scholar was more thoughtful. I believe it is cultural. Some species value humility. Perhaps humans think sitting in back shows proper respect. The Zephyrite merchant had a different view. They hide their poverty. Earth's economy is small compared to ours. They sit in back because they cannot afford to sit in front. Everyone had a theory. Everyone assumed human behavior came from some kind of deficit. Weakness, fear, insecurity, cultural oddness. No one considered that humans might have a strategic reason. Velthar attended the next assembly session with new eyes. He watched the humans carefully. Tayo, Haesun, and Bomi sat in their usual seats, the very last row. Their backs to the rear wall of the chamber. The session began with routine matters. Velthar ignored the speakers. Instead, he studied the room's layout from the human perspective. From the back row, the humans could see every other delegate. Every entrance, every exit. If someone stood up suddenly, they would see it immediately. If a threat entered, they would have precious seconds of warning while beings in the front row remained unaware. The humans had positioned themselves perfectly. Not for status, for survival. Velthar felt a chill run through his body. He had been a diplomat for over a century. He had negotiated with hundreds of species. He thought he understood power and politics, but he had never considered that the most powerful position might be the one everyone else thought was worthless. A thought occurred to him. If humans positioned themselves this way in the assembly, did they do it everywhere? He looked around the chamber more carefully. The human guards who stood along the walls were fewer than other species guards. But they stood at key positions. Positions where they could see multiple entrances. Positions where they could respond quickly to any section of the room. The human aides sat scattered through the audience, not clustered together like other delegations. Each aide had clear sight lines to different areas. It was a security formation. The entire human delegation was arranged not for politics but for protection. Protection of what? Of whom? Velthar frowned. Were humans protecting themselves? Or were they protecting everyone in the room? The session ended. Velthar stood slowly, his mind full of questions. He had learned something important today, but he didn't fully understand it yet. As he walked toward the exit, he passed the human delegation. Teo nodded to him politely. "Good session today, Ambassador." "Yes," Velthar replied. Then before he could stop himself, he asked, "Ambassador Teo, are you protecting us?" Teo's expression didn't change. "We're just diplomats, Ambassador Velthar. Same as you." But his eyes said something different. His eyes said yes. Velthar left the chamber feeling unsettled. He had always thought he was one of the strong ones. A warrior diplomat, a being of power and influence. But for the first time in his long life, he wondered if true strength looked different than he had always believed. The emergency session was called at midnight station time. Velthar rushed to the assembly hall with dozens of other diplomats. Something terrible had happened. The message said it was urgent, critical. All delegates must attend immediately. The hall filled quickly. Species that normally took hours to arrive appeared within minutes. Fear moved faster than protocol. Velthar took his usual third-row seat. Around him, other diplomats whispered nervously. What could be so urgent? The speaker appeared at the podium, its crystallized form pulsing with distress. Members of the Galactic Council, we have received a declaration of war. The Skrell sovereignty has attacked the Oran Collective. 3 colonies have been destroyed. Millions are dead. The hall erupted in chaos. Voices shouted in dozens of languages. Delegates stood and argued. The Skrell had been aggressive for years, but no one expected this. The Oran were peaceful traders. This war would drag half the galaxy into conflict. Velthar looked around the chamber. Every powerful species was pushing forward, trying to get closer to the speaker. The Aquilon delegate shoved past smaller species. The Marthan scholars raised their voices above the noise. Everyone wanted to be heard. Everyone wanted to control what happened next. The front rows became a mass of bodies. Delegates fought for position. Those who could claim the most prominent spots would have the most influence. This was how crises worked in the galaxy. Power went to those brave enough to seize it. Velthar stood and moved forward. His Kryn strength let him push through the crowd. He reached the second row, then the first. This was important. The Kryn Empire needed to have a voice in whatever came next. In the chaos, he glanced back out of habit. The humans sat in the last row, unmoving. Teo had been joined by others. Military advisor Hasan was there. So was a new human Velthar didn't recognize, a man in a dark uniform with insignia that marked him as military. The nameplate on his uniform read, Captain Mincio. They sat perfectly still while chaos swirled around them. They weren't scrambling for position. They weren't shouting to be heard. They just watched. Why? Velthar felt frustrated. This was the biggest crisis in decades. This was when species needed to show their strength. Yet humans did nothing. The emergency session lasted 6 hours. Species made demands. The Aquilon wanted military intervention. The Zephyrites wanted economic sanctions. The Marthan wanted peaceful negotiations. Everyone had an opinion. The humans never stood to speak. Captain Mincio occasionally whispered to Hasan. Teo took notes on his tablet. But they offered no suggestions, no solutions, no help, other delegates noticed. During a brief recess, the Aquilon delegate approached Velthar. The humans are useless, she said with disgust. A war begins and they sit silent like cowards. Velthar wanted to defend them, but he had no defense to offer. The humans did appear useless right now. The session resumed. More arguing. More positioning. Species formed alliances and made threats. The Skrell had allies who supported their claim to Oran territory. Others supported the Oran. The galaxy was dividing into camps. Finally, after hours of debate, the session ended with no resolution. The council would meet again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until some solution emerged. Velthar returned to his quarters exhausted. He had spent 6 hours fighting for speaking time, making arguments, building coalitions. He had done his duty as a Kryn diplomat, but his mind kept returning to the humans in the back row. Why did they come if they weren't going to participate? The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Emergency sessions every day, chaos, arguments, species competing for influence. and humans sitting quietly in the back watching. On the fourth day, everything changed. The morning session began normally. More debates about how to respond to the Skrell-Oran War. The Skrell delegate defended his government's actions. The Oran delegate begged for intervention. Everyone else argued about what intervention should look like. Velthar stood to propose a peacekeeping force. Other species would contribute ships and soldiers. The Kryn would lead it. Several delegates nodded in agreement. It was a good plan, strong, decisive. Then the lights flickered. For just a moment, the entire hall went dark. Emergency lights activated immediately, bathing everything in red. Confused voices filled the air. The speaker tried to restore order. Please remain calm. This is just a technical issue. But Velthar felt something wrong. His warrior instincts activated. This wasn't a technical issue. This was something else. He looked toward the back of the hall. The humans were moving. Not panicking. Not running. But shifting positions with purpose. Captain Mincio stood. Heisun's hand moved to something at her waist. Then they appeared. One moment, the space near the speaker's podium was empty. The next moment, 10 armed figures materialized. They wore Skrell armor and carried weapons. Teleportation. They had teleported directly into the assembly hall. The lead attacker raised his weapon. Nobody move. This assembly is now under Skrell control. All delegates will remain seated while we transport the council leadership to our ships. Panic exploded through the hall. Delegates screamed. Some tried to run. The Skrell attackers fired warning shots into the ceiling. Energy bolts cracked through the air. Anyone who moves will be killed, the lead attacker shouted. Velthar's combat training kicked in instantly. He moved toward the attackers. His people were warriors. He couldn't just sit here while terrorists threatened the council. 2 other Kryn delegates joined him. They were strong, fast, trained since childhood for battle. They could handle 10 Skrell soldiers, but when Velthar reached the first attacker, he realized he was wrong. These weren't normal soldiers. They wore enhanced armor. Their shields absorbed his strikes. Their weapons fired faster than anything he had seen. One attacker hit Velthar with an energy blast. Pain shot through his body. He fell to one knee. Around him, other delegates who tried to fight were being disabled just as quickly. The lead attacker laughed. The mighty Kryn, not so mighty today. Guards rushed into the hall from the main entrance. But the attackers had positioned themselves perfectly. They controlled the podium area. Anyone approaching from the front would be exposed to crossfire. 3 Aquilin guards charged forward. The attackers cut them down easily. Their weapons were too advanced. Their tactics too good. They had planned this perfectly. Velthar struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his body. He could see what was happening now. The attackers were moving toward the first 3 rows, toward all the powerful delegates, toward everyone who had pushed forward to be close to the speaker. They were taking hostages, the most important hostages in the galaxy, and Velthar was one of them. Energy restraints locked around his wrists, around the Aquilin delegate, around the Marthan scholars. Everyone in the front rows was being captured. Anyone who tried to resist was stunned unconscious. Through his pain, Velthar's mind worked. This attack was brilliant in its brutality. Take the council's most powerful members hostage, and you could force any demand. The Skrell weren't just making a statement. They were taking control of the entire political structure of the galaxy. But something was wrong with their plan. Velthar could feel it. The attackers were efficient, but they seemed nervous. They kept glancing toward the back of the hall. Velthar turned his head, fighting through the pain. The humans were no longer sitting. Captain Minseo had moved to the side of the room. Heisun had somehow reached a position near one of the smaller exits. Other humans Velthar hadn't noticed before were appearing from different sections of the hall. They had been scattered throughout the audience, positioned like pieces on a game board, and they were all moving with one purpose. The lead Skrell attacker noticed them too. "Stay where you are, humans. We will kill the hostages." Teo stood slowly in the back row. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the hall despite the chaos. It wasn't loud. It was just precise. "No," Teo said. "You won't." The Skrell attacker pointed his weapon at Velthar's head. "One more step and the Kryn dies." Teo's expression didn't change. "You teleported into this room thinking you had surprise. You positioned yourselves near the podium, thinking you controlled the high-value targets. You brought 10 soldiers thinking that was enough. The attacker's weapon didn't waver. It is enough. You made 3 mistakes, Teo continued calmly. First, you assumed the front rows held the real power. Second, you assumed we were diplomats. His eyes were cold now. Hard. Third, Teo finished, you forgot that humans always sit in the back. Everything happened at once. Captain Mincio moved first. What Velthar had thought was a ceremonial pin on his uniform detached and transformed. In less than a second, it became a small weapon. The captain fired. The energy bolt hit a Skrell attacker's shield generator. The shield collapsed. Before the attacker could react, Hysun was there. She moved faster than Velthar thought possible for a human. Her tablet became a shield in her hands. She blocked the attacker's weapon and struck with her other hand. The Skrell soldier dropped. The other humans moved as one unit. They had been positioned throughout the hall. Not randomly, not for comfort, but strategically. Each human had a clear line to multiple attackers. Each human had cover. Each human knew exactly what to do. The lead Skrell attacker fired at Teo. But the human ambassador was already gone, moving with surprising speed for someone who looked so calm moments before. The shot hit empty space. Security protocols active, Teo said into a communicator at his wrist. Lock down all teleportation points. Seal secondary exits. Activate barrier fields around hostages. Velthar watched in shock as the hall transformed. Hidden systems activated. Energy barriers appeared around the delegates in the front rows, protecting them from crossfire. The attackers suddenly found themselves cut off from their escape routes. Impossible, the lead attacker shouted. We disabled your security systems. You disabled the station's primary systems, a new voice said. A human woman appeared from a side door. She wore a uniform marked with technical insignia. You didn't know about our secondary network. We installed it 3 years ago. Just in case, Jihi, the scientific advisor. Except she clearly wasn't just an advisor. She held a device that projected holographic displays. Your teleportation signatures are mapped. Your communication frequencies are jammed. Your extraction team outside the station is being engaged by human defense ships right now. One attacker tried to teleport out. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Panic showed in his body language. I told you, Teo said quietly. You made mistakes. The attackers realized they were in trouble. They formed a defensive circle, weapons pointing outward. There were still 10 of them. They were trained soldiers with advanced equipment, but the humans were everywhere. Velthar watched as Bomi, the cultural liaison, approached an attacker from behind. She moved like smoke, using the panicked crowd as cover. When she reached the Skrell soldier, she touched his neck with something small. The attacker collapsed instantly. Neural disruptor, she explained to a nearby delegate. Programmed for Skrell physiology. Temporary paralysis. He'll wake up in a few hours. A cultural liaison who carried neural disruptors and knew Skrell biology well enough to target their nervous system. What kind of diplomat was she? Captain Minseo coordinated the human response. Team 2, flank from the east exit. Team 3, keep the hostages covered. Team 4, watch for reinforcements. Teams? Velthar looked around and realized there were far more humans in the hall than he had noticed. They had been sitting scattered through the audience, dressed as aides, translators, observers. All of them were trained soldiers. Every single human in the assembly was a fighter. The battle was brief. The Skrell attackers were good, but they were designed to fight from a position of surprise. Once that was gone, they had no advantage. The humans had trained for exactly this scenario. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, supporting each other, never giving the attackers a clear target. Within 5 minutes, all 10 attackers were subdued. Not killed, subdued. The humans used non-lethal methods on every one of them. Precise, controlled, professional. Station security finally arrived in force. They looked confused. The crisis was already over. Teo spoke to the head of security. We've secured the attackers. Their teleportation equipment is disabled. We've also captured their extraction team in Docking Bay 7. All evidence is being preserved for investigation. The security chief, a massive being with 6 arms, stared at the human ambassador. How did you do this? We were prepared, Teo said simply. The emergency barriers around the hostages dropped. Velthar stood slowly, his restraints released by human technology. His body still hurt from the energy blast, but he was alive. Everyone in the front rows was alive, because the humans had saved them. Medical teams arrived. The humans had those too, Velthar realized. Human medics moved through the hall, treating injured delegates. They knew the biology of dozens of species. They carried equipment for every kind of wound. Hyson approached Velthar. "Ambassador, you're injured. Please sit down. Our medic will treat you." "I don't understand," Velthar said, his voice weak. "You're diplomats. How can you fight like that?" Hysun's expression softened slightly. "We're humans, Ambassador. On Earth, we learned a long time ago that the people who talk peace must be ready for war. Otherwise, peace is just hoping no one attacks you." A human medic examined Velthar's injuries. As she worked, Velthar's mind raced. He thought about every human he had met. Teo the ambassador, Hysun the military advisor, Bomi the cultural liaison, Captain Minseo, Ji-hee, Wu-sung, Dong-wook. Every single one of them had two roles, their diplomatic title and their real purpose. Protection. "The back row," Velthar said suddenly. "That's why you sit there." Teo had moved close enough to hear. He nodded. "Yes, you can see everything from there. Every entrance. Every exit. Every person in the room. Yes, you're not being humble. You're being tactical." Teo crouched down to Velthar's eye level. "Ambassador, I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear. The front rows? They're the worst place to be in a crisis. Everyone there is visible, exposed, trapped. When something bad happens, the people in front are the first targets." Velthar thought about the attack. The Skrell had gone straight for the front rows. For the powerful delegates. For people like him. "We sit in the back because if something goes wrong, we need to be able to protect everyone in front of us." Teo continued. "We need distance, perspective, response time. We can't do that from the first row." "But other species think you're weak," Velthar said. "We know." Teo stood. "We've always known. But we're not here for status, Ambassador. We're here to make sure everyone goes home safely at the end of the day." Velthar looked around the hall. Delegates were being treated. The attackers were in custody. No one had died. A few injuries, but everyone would recover, because the humans had been in the back row, watching, ready, prepared for the one thing everyone else thought would never happen. "On Earth," Hysun said, joining the conversation. "We have thousands of years of history, wars, terrorism, attacks in places that should have been safe. We learned that safety isn't about looking strong. It's about being ready when strength fails. Every human you've met here has two jobs," Teo added. "Yes, Bomi is our cultural liaison. She's also trained in xenobiology and combat medicine. Ji-hee is our science advisor. She's also our technical security specialist. Wu-sung manages trade relations. He's also our chief security coordinator." "And you?" Velthar asked. Teo smiled slightly. "I'm an ambassador. And before that I spent 20 years in Earth's special forces. Most of us did. We're diplomats first, but we never forget our other training." The medic finished with Velthar. He stood, testing his body. The pain was fading. He would be fine. He looked at the back row of the hall. Those seats everyone thought were worthless. Those positions everyone mocked. "You've been protecting us all along," Velthar said quietly. "For 30 years? That's our job," Hysun said. "Someone has to watch the doors." Captain Minseo approached. "Ambassador Teo, the station security has confirmed that all threats are neutralized. The Skrell extraction team in the docking bay has surrendered. No casualties on any side." "Good work, Captain," Teo said. Then he looked at Velthar. "We should evacuate the hall while the investigation proceeds. Are you able to walk, Ambassador?" Velthar nodded. As the delegates filed out, he watched the humans. They moved through the crowd, checking on people, offering help, staying alert even though the danger had passed. They were the last ones to leave, making sure everyone else got out safely first from the back row. The council didn't meet for 3 days after the attack. The station needed repairs. The investigation needed time. And everyone needed to think about what had happened. Velthar spent those days reviewing footage of the attack. The station's security systems had recorded everything. He watched the recording dozens of times. Each viewing showed him something new. How the humans had positioned themselves throughout the hall before the attack. How they moved with precision when it began. How every action was coordinated. How they protected others while neutralizing threats. But more than that, he watched the moments before the attack. The boring parts of the session. Regular debates about trade and resources. In those moments, the humans sat still in the back row, watching, always watching. They had been ready for 30 years, ready for an attack that might never come. And when it finally came, they were exactly where they needed to be. On the fourth day, Velthar went looking for Tayo. He found the human ambassador in one of the station's observation lounges, the same place they had first talked privately. "May I join you?" Velthar asked. "Of course, Ambassador." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Velthar spoke. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" Tayo asked. "I thought you were weak, passive. I thought sitting in the back meant you were afraid or didn't belong here." Velthar's voice was heavy with regret. "I was wrong about everything." "You weren't wrong to wonder," Tayo said gently. "Our behavior doesn't make sense from most species' perspectives. You value visible strength, direct displays of power. That's logical for your culture. But humans value something different. We value preparation, awareness, the ability to protect others." Tayo looked at Velthar. "On Earth, we have a long history of learning things the hard way. We've had surprise attacks, terrorist incidents, moments when the people who were supposed to be safe suddenly weren't. We learned that real security doesn't come from looking strong. It comes from being ready." Velthar thought about his own people. The Kryn were warriors. They had strong traditions of honor in combat. If a Kryn diplomat had sat in the back row, other Kryn would see it as cowardice. "We must always face our enemies directly." "And that's a valid approach," Tayo said. "But it assumes you know where your enemies are. What if they come from behind? What if they appear in a place you thought was safe? Then we adapt. We fight from where we are, so do we. But we prefer to choose where we are before the fight starts." Tayo smiled. "We're not better than other species, Ambassador. We're just different. Earth taught us to think about security in ways that other worlds didn't have to." "Because Earth was dangerous," Velthar said, remembering his research. "Very dangerous. Humans evolved with predators hunting us and prey running from us. We were always in the middle, always aware that something might attack. That awareness became part of who we are." Tayo paused. "And then we became dangerous to each other. Our wars taught us that safety is never guaranteed, that peace requires constant vigilance." Velthar felt something shift in his understanding. "You never explained this to the Council." "Why not? Would they have believed us?" Tayo asked. "If we had stood up in our first session and said we sit in the back for tactical reasons, what would the other species have thought?" "They would have thought you were paranoid. Or arrogant, exactly. So we let them think what they wanted. We did our job. We watched. We prepared. And we hoped we'd never need to use our training." Tayo's expression became sad. "I wish we hadn't needed it. I wish the attack never happened." "But because you were ready, everyone lived," Velthar said firmly. "The Skrell attackers wanted to take hostages. They wanted to use us as leverage for their war. You stopped them. We did what we were trained to do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Velthar asked the question that had been bothering him most. "Tayo, will you teach me? Will you teach the Kryn how to think like humans about security?" Tayo looked surprised. "You want to learn from us?" "I do. I've been a diplomat for over a century. I thought I understood power and politics. But I never thought about what you think about: positioning, awareness, protection." Velthar met the human's eyes. "I want to understand. Not just for myself, for my people." Tayo considered this. "It would take time. And I can't share all our tactical information. Some things need to stay classified." "I understand. But whatever you can share, I would be grateful to learn." "Then yes, I'll teach you what I can." The next council session was different from any before it. When Velthar entered the assembly hall, he saw the change immediately. Several species had moved their seating positions. Not everyone. The Aquilin delegate still sat in the first row, proud and visible. Some things wouldn't change, but others had shifted. The Marthan scholars had moved from the second row to the fifth row. The Zephyrite merchants had spread out instead of clustering together. Even some of the smaller species who usually sat in the middle had moved to different positions. The humans sat in their usual place, the very back row. But now they had company. Velthar had chosen a seat in the second to last row, close to the back, where he could see the whole room, where his back was to a wall and his eyes could watch the entrances. When Tayo arrived and saw Velthar's new position, he smiled and nodded in respect. The session began. The speaker addressed the attack and announced new security measures. Then normal business resumed. Debates, negotiations, the usual political dance. But something was different now. Delegates paid more attention to their surroundings. Guards were positioned more carefully. Species who had always competed for front-row seats seemed less eager to push forward. Fear had changed things, yes, but also understanding. During a recess, the Marthan scholar approached Velthar. "Ambassador, I notice you've changed your seating." "I have," Velthar confirmed. "May I ask why?" Velthar thought about how to answer. "I learned something important. Being visible is not the same as being powerful. Sometimes the strongest position is the one where you can see everything and protect everyone." The Marthan's multiple eyes blinked in what Velthar recognized as their species' expression of understanding. "The humans taught you this." "They did. Perhaps they have taught us all something." Over the following weeks, Velthar met regularly with Tayo and other humans. They shared what they could about situational awareness, about planning for unexpected threats, about the difference between appearing strong and being prepared. Velthar learned phrases from Earth's history. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Never sit with your back to the door. The best defense is awareness. Simple wisdom, but powerful. He began to see the galaxy differently. In meetings, he watched for patterns. In rooms, he noted exits. When negotiating, he thought about where he sat and why. Not paranoia, just awareness. Other species noticed the change in him. Some thought he was becoming too cautious. Others asked to learn what he was learning. Slowly, human thinking about security began to spread through the council. The humans never claimed credit. They never stood up and lectured other species about tactics. They just continued to sit in the back watching, ready, doing their job. One day, several months after the attack, Velthar sat with Tayo in the observation lounge again. It had become their regular meeting place. "I have a question," Velthar said. "During the attack, your people protected everyone, even species that had mocked you, even delegates who had called you weak." Why? Tayo looked out at the stars. "Because that's what you do when you're strong enough to help. You help not just your friends, not just people who respect you, everyone. That's not how most species think." "I know," Tayo smiled, "but it's how humans think. We learned a long time ago that real strength isn't about defeating enemies. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Even if they don't understand, even if they don't appreciate it, you protect others from the back row, always. Because someone has to watch the doors. Someone has to be ready when everything goes wrong. Someone has to be the last line of defense." Tayo looked at Velthar. "That's why we sit in the back, Ambassador. Not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to let others think we're weak while we do the work that actually matters." Velthar understood now. Completely. The humans had never needed respect or recognition. They needed position, purpose, the ability to do their job when it mattered most. "Thank you," Velthar said quietly. "For what?" "For protecting us. For teaching me. For showing me what strength really means." Tayo nodded. "You're welcome, Ambassador. And thank you for being willing to learn. Not every species would change their thinking after 200 years of doing things one way. I had a good teacher." Years passed. The war between the Skrell and Orin was resolved through negotiation. The galaxy continued its complicated dance of politics and power. The council met regularly on Apex Prime Station, and in every session, the humans sat in the back row, watching, ready, protecting everyone in front of them from dangers most delegates never even thought about. But they weren't alone anymore. Other species had learned the lesson. Not all of them. Some beings would always want the front row, the visible position, the obvious power. But those who understood true strength, they sat where they could see, where they could respond, where they could protect from the back.